All right, Mark, you wanna start kicking it
Absolutely.
off?
I think it's a good time to go ahead and get things rolling here. First of all, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today on behalf of Openlogix and Lmntrix here. So real quick about Openlogix, I'll just give you a quick overview. Openlogix has been an IBM business partner for over a decade as a value-added reseller, mainly a systems integrator, a lot of services. We've recently aligned with some strategic technology partners, though, to aid in our ability to provide best of breed next gen solutions to meet our clients' goals, SLAs, etc. Our purpose is to be important to our clients and partners as a reliable business strategy and technology professional partner. So these succinctly selected technology partners all solve unique business challenges which range from availability to security, speed, storage, scalability, integration, and interoperability. We have we are very excited to add Lmntrix into our elite group of new channel partners for Openlogix in a targeted effort to expand our offerings to meet our clients' technology needs. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of cybersecurity services out there, so it's exceedingly difficult to cut through the noise and find the right partner. And Hamlet will touch on that in a very interesting slide, I'm sure, later. We've heard many security service providers tell a similar story. However, Lmntrix stands out from the rest with their integrated and multi-vector approach to cybersecurity, which uses a combination of advanced network and endpoint threat detection, deceptions, analytics, and threat intelligence, all of which is complemented with proactive threat hunting and response. This is distinctly different methodology to cybersecurity, which proactively seeks out the threats, validates the incident, and responds, versus using legacy log-based approaches, which are good for compliance but result in delayed response, provide limited context, and may not have the right information to correlate and fully validate the threats correctly and quickly, but most importantly. So in a cybersecurity as a service slash MSP approach to their platform, Lmntrix is leveraging unprecedented OEM arrangements with powerful partners like Endgame, Checkpoint, Palo Alto. I won't steal any more of Hamlet's thunder here. I guess, turn it over from there. I hope I've got everybody's attention. And without further ado, Hamlet, the stage is yours.
Very good, Mark. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. So this webinar will have a lot of information. There are 5 handouts. You're welcome to download them and review them at your leisure. So at the core, Lmntrix is we are in the business of detecting and responding to advanced security threats. The outcome we deliver clients are fully validated incidents or fully validated breaches, and these are delivered with detailed investigation actions and detailed recommendations on exactly what your team needs to do next. So if I didn't say my name is Hamlet, just like the play. I lead all North American operations here at Lmntrix. Previous to this role, I was a CIO and CTO of a financial services firm, leading software engineering teams, and business intelligence teams, risk teams, infrastructure teams. I typically have a counterpart to these webinars who is Ian Murphy, who's based in London. Ian was not able to make this webinar today, unfortunately. So a quick background on Lmntrix. So the management team, previous to starting Lmntrix, built and sold a traditional MSSP, an early adopter in the APAC region. That company was called Earthwave. We built that company from 1999. In 2013, we sold that to a company called Dimension Data, which is part of NTT Japan. So what you're going to be introduced to today is several decades of experience in building and managing and selling a traditional MSSP. And at that time, we were recognized by Gartner and IDC as a sort of a leader in our space. So what we did after the sale is we did extensive research on thousands of data breaches. So if you do that, and if you really do sort of a deep dive into every single data breach and you reverse engineer it, there are common themes among all of them. And internally we call this white space. So this white space is what threat actors continually use to break into companies. So in essence, Lmntrix is a company based on several decades of this experience, and we reverse engineered this solution, which is multi-vector, holistic, and then backed entirely by our security team. So that's kind of at a core sort of what we do. I'm gonna sort of go to the next slide here. Give me a second here, 1 second. It's a so what question. Threats are basically undetected continuously, depending on if you're reading Forrester, Gartner, IDC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Human threat actors are staying on customer networks between 3 and 8 months, and organizations are basically failing to detect and respond to these security threats in a timely manner. So effectively, the first part of this webinar is I'm going to focus on use cases, the things that we solve. And then the second part of this webinar will be technocentric in conversation, where we'll dive into the technology stack, and it will get very detailed on the technology stack in the second half of this conversation. So first of all, we recognized during our research, and we work with a lot of security teams, including the target team after they were breached, and including a lot of other unknown data breaches that did not make the news. The way security monitoring is done today in our industry hasn't actually changed much in about 20 years. This approach relies on collecting logs from the perimeter, internal devices, applications, systems, services, basically anything you get your hands on, and then you send that log data to a SOC, a SIEM, an MSSP, and then we're asking them to find the needle in the haystack. What you actually end up with on the other end is just more hay. Way too many alerts, even after all the tuning, correlation, aggregation, all the use case developments. So what we recognized essentially is this noise that we self-create in this approach is the threat itself. The advanced threats and attackers are hiding in this noise. They use it as cover. So logs are great for compliance and maybe some DevOps, but it's really not great for catching advanced threats. Our experience shows, and based on research we've done, only 5% of incidents are actually detected through this sort of SIEM log-based approach. 70% of the time, it's typically detected in another method. Usually a third party is the one that tells you that you've been breached, or it's a smart engineer that notices some strange behavior that is not a part of the security team. So this noise produces what our industry is now calling alert fatigue. So I'm going to be stuck on this slide, so bear with me. This will be I'm going to talk about the use cases on this slide, and then I'll move forward. So just bear with me. So that first part is alert fatigue. So as a result, our platform does not use a SIEM. It does not rely on pulling any logs from your own customer devices, applications, services to deliver our results. And there's a reason for that. Many times the log data that you have doesn't actually have the right information. So this issue of alert fatigue is extremely important. There are basically two types of logs in a SIEM. There are allowed logs and there's block logs. This is all typical, most traditional MSSPs and SIEM vendors have to go by. So what they send you as a result is top threats, top ports, top destinations, etc. What are they actually doing? They are nothing more than a very expensive messenger for your controls. What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to find novel threats and sophisticated adversaries. And how many of them can actually sort of deliver on that promise? Because the answer is not in the logs. If your current controls knew about it, they would have already blocked it. So this point is very, very important. And please note that no SIEM has actually detected any major data breach currently, including the Marriott data breach, where the threat actors stayed on the corporate environment for 4 years. Marriott has a very large security operations center. They also have a very well-known third-party MSSP, both of them using log-based approach, and it was missed in their logs for 4 years. This has played itself out at Home Depot. The University of Washington Medical Center last week had 1 million patient records exfiltrated out. And it basically, week after week, there was a Rush hospital in Chicago, which had data exfiltrated out as well, 300,000 records, again, just this week. So this approach doesn't work for security monitoring. So very, very important. Second piece is that there is a lack of detective controls and a lot of complexity in most environments, especially as the enterprises get sort of bigger and bigger. So what we've recognized is many customers don't really have enough detective controls. A lot of customers are still focused on building bigger and bigger walls with, as much as they can on the firewall side. But in reality, threat actors are going to get in. It's a good analogy is, as much as you try, you can't keep the ants out of your house. And so, but when when you notice the ant in the kitchen, your first response is to go and eliminate it as quickly as possible, because if you don't, you know that there are more behind them. So a lot of organizations do have an IDS or an IPS, but these are typically badly configured, poorly tuned, generating too many false positives and negatives, and sort of adding to the noise problem. The second issue is a lot of organizations, and depending on the size of the organization, have anywhere from 6 to 50 different security vendors and products in their environment. These solutions are typically disconnected, resulting in tremendous operational complexity. And there really is no coordination and integration between these various disparate systems. So case in point, when Target was breached, and we have a lot of extensive knowledge, basically a third-party MSSP noticed some strange behavior, sent the ticket into the Target SOC team, and they said, hey, we think something is going on over here. Please investigate. An engineer at the Target SOC team logged in the ticketing system, took the ticket, investigated for about a week or two, closed out the ticket. Another week passed by, same thing. Hey, we think something's happening over here. No real context, no real direction, nothing validated. It came into the internal team, again, investigated for about a week or two, closed out the ticket because they're being inundated with tickets, 200-300 a month. And then you fast forward 6 months, and both the CEO and the CIO were let go. The cost of Target for that data breach, if you actually look on their financial statements, is approaching $300 million. It's actually a line item today for Target. So the issue we have is that we rely way too much on vendors to block malware. And I'm going to connect this to the technology stack later on. So when they deliver and the endpoint doesn't detect something, that sits on the endpoint indefinitely and ultimately becomes the source of most data breaches. So if you figure out how to detect that, you're going to be sort of in the positive a lot of the times. So this is what we do, and I'm going to show you how later on how we do that. So let me forward here. So the third issue is, as an organization, even if you do all the right things, so you recruit the best team, you buy all the right products, the issue you end up with is you basically end up with an alert at the end of the day. This alert needs to be acted on from someone within the organization. They need to make sure it's real, and they need to make sure it's actually validated. So what we've discovered, even at Fortune 500s, not even the mid-size or Fortune 500s, they don't really have the time, the skill set, the resources to validate these threats. A lot of times, security is really not their core business. So what we do, what we call this, is breach validation, and breach validation is missing in most organizations. So we built this into our platform as a capability, and it is native to the platform. So what we deliver are validated incidents or validated breaches where our team has already done all the necessary validation, telling you exactly what happened, and most important to this is detailed recommendations on exactly what to do next. So change a firewall rule, add additional VLAN, telling you exactly the firewall rule, telling you exactly what to add. This is the third incident we've seen in the accounting department. Please add this additional control. So what happens over time is day over day, month over month, your attack surface sort of decreases as you are sort of following our detailed recommendations on what to do. So breach validation, really, really important, and it's missing in most organizations, and we built this into our platform. It is a part of the core service. The next issue we recognize is that in almost all major incidents, and I talked about this earlier, the attacker stayed on the company networks undetected 3 to 9 months. And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason why Marriott wasn't able to sort of detect the threat actor for 4 years. And once the perimeter is broken, and very easy to do by a phishing email or spear phishing email, regardless of how much training you do on your users, don't click on things, somebody's always going to click on something. So once an attacker has a foothold, they actually don't know where they're at. So their first order of business is to try and install additional malware for persistence and backdoors, and then eventually to dump all the credentials. And I'll show you later on in the technology stack how they do that. And then they slowly move laterally, escalating their privileges before they finally figure out, how the network is laid out, and et cetera. So why it's difficult to detect these attackers is because they're using the exact same protocols, they're doing the exact same behavior as a normal employee. So very, very difficult. They're not going to, at 11 o'clock at night, try to exfiltrate 11 gigs of data. They're going to try to fit in within the noise, which is occurring during the daytime business hours. Very methodical, very, very slow. And I'll tell you later on when we talk about threat hunting how we find them and how we discover them in a very quick amount of time. So we call this a post-breach strategy. Companies do not have a post-breach strategy in place to detect either rogue employees that are poking around the environment or criminal organizations or even nation-state attackers. So this is a core part of our platform and it's built in, and I'll talk about that as part of our deception technology, and you'll see that in a later part of this presentation. The final issue in terms of use cases that we saw is that once an attack has happened and you ask an organization the following questions, and it doesn't really matter the size. How did they get into your environment? How long were they there? How do they get around? What tools do they use? Are there still any backdoors in the environment? What did they steal? How do they do it? So what you typically do at that time is you'll call an IR team, a third party. You'll point them to your firewall logs and your IPS logs, but these do not tell you the full story or even half the story. So it's very similar to a homicide detective going into a crime scene and they're trying to put the pieces together, but there's no knife, there's no gun, and they make a lot of educated guesses. The costs escalate very, very quickly from here. The IR costs, if you're a large organization, you have to notify your customers, you may have to buy, credit monitoring services, there's going to be class action lawsuits that come in. So the costs escalate very, very quickly after a data breach. So we call this a sort of a lack of evidence, and most organizations don't have the forensic capabilities to answer those questions. How do they get in? How long were they there? How do they get around? What tools do they use? So we built this post-breach forensic capability into our platform to allow us to tell customers exactly the whole story. So those are the core elements of our platform and in terms of the use cases that we're solving. Now, the approach we take to address these issues is very adversarial in nature. It's an adversarial pursuit. It's military in mindset. It's basically going door to door, computer to computer. It's very proactive. It's not reactive. It is offensive, and because it's offensive, and by the way, we call it threat hunting. There are components that we install inside your network that sit at the network layer, at the endpoint layer. We feed it intelligence. There's deceptions. There's a lot of components to it, and then the entire thing is backed by our team. So I will explain this to you as we go on. So what Gartner says today, sort of in the time of continuous compromise, you need continuous response, not incident response. So you can't wait for an incident to happen. It's typically too late. So you are continuously being breached. If you're continuously being breached, you sort of need to take a different mindset and a different approach to security than the current MSSP or SOC approach that we believe is failing customers tremendously today. So what do? We make the fundamental assumption at Lmntrix when we engage. The assumption is you are already breached and you will continuously be breached. Hence the slogan of the company, sort of be the hunter, not the prey. So those are the use cases. That's the approach. Over the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you how we sort of do it and how these use cases connect to our technology stack. Now, the technology stack is great, but the key here is also our team. When you combine them as a platform and a service, that's when really the outcomes, really the aha moments for clients are when we do trials, when we do free POCs for customers, and we find incidents that all the current controls have missed. That's when the aha moment comes in. When you do a pen test while we're running a POC and we catch the pen tester, that's sort of when the aha moment comes in. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So what do you get with Lmntrix? 95% of the time, we're notifying customers within 24 hours, hey, we're investigating an incident. We notify you immediately. We're investigating an incident. And typically 6, 8, 12 hours later, you get a detailed report that says, this is what happened. We were able to block and quarantine it. Based on your previous policy you set with us, we were able to host isolate that machine. By the way, we know exactly how it got in, and we're recommending these changes to your firewall. We're recommending this additional change. And so slowly over time, your attack surface increases. But all that work, validating the actual breach, correlating the network data, correlating the endpoint data, correlating the intelligence, all that is done by us. We don't lob over a dumb alert to you, hey, we think something's happening. No, we tell you exactly what's happening. And so what ends up happening is we effectively become an extension of your team. And typically, you talk to us, once a week, twice a week. We assign a full dedicated investigations team to the account. There is a dedicated investigation manager. And mind you, these are not SOC 1, SOC 2 analysts where they're network engineers, they're report writers, things of that nature, sysadmins. These are malware analysts. These are experienced, several decades of experience, software reverse engineering analysts that have enterprise experience from small organizations to the large organizations. So when we call you, at 3 o'clock in the morning, which we will based on escalation profiles, depending on the severity, or you ask us questions, hey, I'm thinking about re-architecting my network, we're here. We're here to help. We're here to answer those questions. So it is a very white glove service in what we do. So very, very important. In terms of typically 95% of the time, like I said, we investigate these really quickly within 24 hours, and typically within 48 hours, we've eliminated the incident and we're sort of on to the next issue. And I talked about the SIEM challenge earlier, and this is one of the sort of the issues with SIEMs is you get thousands of alerts an hour, thousands of incidents a day, really no way to confirm if they're real incidents, very time consuming for customers where security is really not their core business to investigate these. Security teams either lack the skills to respond, and then the high risk events are hiding in there and they go unnoticed, unfortunately. So let me move forward here and tell you how we do it. So Lmntrix is a validated, integrated, and multi-dimensional threat detection and response architecture. Again, mind you, we ran a previous MSSP for 15 years and we sold it. So this is based on several decades of experience. And I'm going to talk about all these pieces. Validated has two meanings. Meaning one is we validate everything on our end before telling you exactly what happened and then exactly what to do next. Validated has another meaning where we expect customers have the basic controls in place. You've got the next-gen firewall. You've got the spam filtering in place on the outside. You may have an IPS or an IDS that comes with that firewall. You may have web application filtering on the outside. So we expect customers have the basic controls. And if you don't, then obviously we'll tell you to talk to your integrator, in this case Openlogix, to make sure you have the normal controls that an organization should have in today. Integrated means all of our components talk to each other. Now, it is a modular platform, meaning it is not necessary to subscribe to all of it, but there are recommended subscriptions. But when you add components to it, all of them talk to each other, and they're fully integrated amongst each other. So, and this is one of the issues that I talked about earlier, where a lot of organizations might have between 6 and 50 different security products. So you've got an endpoint product, CrowdStrike, Cylance, Carbon Black. It's got its own portal. You've got a network appliance, Blue Coat Analytics. It's got its own portal. You've got some threat intelligence that's maybe integrated into your SIEM, and you're trying to correlate the data from your endpoint sensors with your network sensor. So very, very difficult to do in a timely manner. And so our solution is fully integrated. We don't use a SIEM on the back end, and I'll show you how that works in a little bit. And multi-dimensional, every piece of our technology stack has multiple components, and then obviously there's multiple pieces of our technology stack. And we basically create a very detailed layer, very focused on the 5 last stages of the kill chain, if you're familiar with the kill chain. And we subscribe to the meter attack surface platform efficacy. So if you don't know what that is, you can just Google meter, M-I-T-T-R-E, attack, and it'll pop up on Google. And so meter is an organization that looks at all of the ways threat actors, including the most sophisticated threat actors, which are the Russians, the second most sophisticated, which are probably the Chinese, and the third most sophisticated sort of down the road, where they have reverse engineered a lot of the methods and the ways that they use to either scrape memory, break in, maintain persistence, depending on if it's Windows, Linux, Mac OS. So we subscribe to that platform, and as a managed detection and response company, we operate a full research lab. So we test a lot of the products that you, as a CIO or a CISO or a security architect or a governance person inside your organization, may be familiar with, but we test all of these components. And so what you're going to see here is a solution that has a lot of OEM components. It has a lot of internal IP. and a lot of threat hunting, and the entire thing is backed by our team, where we do all of the work. So this isn't a solution we sell you and you operate it, you manage it. This is a solution that we sell you, and then we install it along with you. Going forward, we manage it, we use it. What you do as a customer is you consume the outcomes of that platform. And those outcomes are detailed, validated incidents, detailed recommendations of exactly what to do next. I'm going to pause there for a second. I know we're about 40 minutes in. Any questions at this point before I jump into the technology stack? All right, very good. So what you're seeing on the screen is our technology stack. So this is a combination of proprietary network and endpoint sensors, deceptions, and intelligence. So once we put this technology stack on the inside of the environment, we detect malware, we bait attackers, we go hunting on the network and the endpoints. It's this offensive combination approach of detecting, baiting, hunting on an ongoing basis that produces a result that is far more effective. So it's very similar if you're doing you purchase a home. During the home buying process, there is a home inspection that occurs once, where that home inspector goes through all of the nooks and crannies of the home, produces a report for you, and then you purchase the home and you don't ever do another home inspection typically again. So what we do is we do a home inspection on a daily basis. So good analogy is, we go into an office, we see that, there is something on the desk in the office, and we notice the location of that. Tomorrow morning, we'll come back into that office, and that item has been moved. We're like, okay, well, we know that nobody was in this office. The office door is locked. We know that the nighttime crew that cleans the office wasn't in here either. Well, this is interesting. We want to know why it got moved. And so this applies to network drivers, comm objects, things that occur on endpoints, on networks. And I'll talk about this threat hunting, which is a very adversarial approach, where we're looking for anomalous behavior. And it's it produces a result that is far more effective than anything you've probably seen. So the platform is made up of 6 core service elements. There's detect, respond, deceive, hunt, intelligence, and reconnaissance, which is dark web. The entire solution is 24/7 human analyst driven. So the solution sits inside of your environment. It is out of band, and most importantly, modular in aspect. So we're not slowing down the environment. And I'll explain this in a little bit. So let me start with Lmntrix detect. So this is a network level sensor that we put into your inside of your environment. It typically sits at an egress point right behind the firewall in span or tap mode. This particular sensor has 10 engines running on it. This is either an appliance or an OVA file, a VM, that we can either electronically ship you or put it on an appliance and ship you. There's a tap or span session created right behind either at the core switch or right behind the firewall, and we are inspecting all outgoing and incoming traffic. This engine has 10 engines, as you see here. There's web application detection, there's web security, there's email and anti-spam, there's multiple sandboxes, there's intrusion detection, there's data leakage built in, there's threat intelligence built in, there's anti-malware and bot detection. So this is done as a result of a lot of OEM agreements that we have with Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Lastline, SourceFire, McAfee, including our own threat intelligence feeds, including our own hunting. And the hunting is one of the most important parts. We've built a codified, about 220 codified hunts, both on the network packets as well as the endpoint packets. And I'll show you what a codified hunt looks like. It's very technical in nature, but I will try to sort of connect that to make sure we understand exactly what that is. But this single sensor, it comes with all these engines. And so you may be asking, why is there web security inside a network sensor, inside the environment? Well, there's a high likelihood you have a financial system, PeopleSoft or something from Oracle. It's got a web interface, so your CFO logs into a web interface. It's obviously sitting behind the firewall. There's a high likelihood that that software potentially has some sort of a bug in it. So if a threat actor has infiltrated the environment, they want to get into the financial system or the HR system or whatever system, and it's a web-based system. So we check for SQL injection scripts. We check for all the cross-site scripting on the inside of the environment. You may be asking, why is there an email and anti-spam inside the environment? Well, spam does bypass your external filter. Spear phishing can bypass your external filter. By the way, we use Proofpoint as an OEM partner. Or you've misconfigured something where the user gets a daily email saying, hey, this is sitting in your spam, and they release it. And there is a executable that's attached to it. They're interested, and so we will detect it at that moment. And it's obviously it requires user training or a reconfiguration of the rules that you have on the external spam. But there are very important reasons why we have web security and email security and web application detection, and obviously data leakage. So if you've got internal users that are sending out Excel sheets or PDF documents or Word documents in the clear with customer information, we would detect that as well. One of the most important pieces to this is threat intelligence, and I will show you what threat intelligence looks like at an actual feed and what that actually looks like. So all of these come with, again, this is a network level sensor, sits in tap or span mode at your egress point, inspecting all outgoing and incoming traffic. The second component is Hunt. Hunt is another network level sensor. It's again sitting typically on the inside of the environment, typically at the core switch, and we're looking at typically east-west traffic. This component has three reasons why it exists. It's effectively a network DVR. We are recording network packets, and there's multiple ways we do that. We either record logs and meta packets or meta packets, or actually do full packet capture. And the reason this sensor exists is it's doing two things. It's doing retrospective threat detection, and it's doing automated network hunting. Retrospective threat detection means if there is a zero-day bug that the manufacturer, let's say it's Microsoft, and there's a zero-day bug in Office, which just happened 4 weeks ago. Mac OS just had a zero-day bug 2 weeks ago. Chrome had a zero-day bug yesterday. And what a zero-day bug means is that the OEM did not even know about it, and somebody brought it up to their attention, hey, there is a bug in your software. And so what we do is, since we've been recording network packets, we go backwards in time, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, however long we're recording those packets, a year, and we see if somebody used that bug against us to infiltrate our environment and establish a foothold. So this sensor is extremely powerful. It's effectively a network DVR and allows us to go back in time. The second issue that exists is something called automated network hunting. And I'll show you what that looks like. But effectively, we are hunting on network packets that are anomalous in behavior, that should maybe not exist in your environment. Because threat actors try to use every means to not be detected. So an example would be, we see HTTP and SSL and port 80, and you're using FTP and VNC and SSH. Those are all maybe normal tools by your IT team. There's certain custom applications you have that use custom ports. That's fine. But we notice, it's interesting. In this very big environment, there is a certain port being used on 3 machines. And so that's interesting to us. So we start investigating it. And I'll show you what that looks like in terms of network hunting. So we're hunting on network packets. And as I get to the endpoint, we're hunting on endpoint as well. So as a quick review, Lmntrix Detect and Lmntrix Hunt are network level sensors inspecting packets. And they have 2 different reasons. One has 10 engines. The other is a network DVR for retrospection and automated network hunting. The next component is Lmntrix Respond. Respond, as an MDR, as an advanced managed detection and response company, we test all of the endpoints. So we've tested CrowdStrike, Cylance, Carbon Black, Trend, McAfee. And so we have an OEM arrangement with a company called Endgame, which is used by the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force. But it's not just Endgame. We've added it in 2 other engines. We've feeded intelligence, our own intelligence, which is very big, and I'll talk about that in a little bit and why it's larger than competing products. And then we create a custom sensor for every customer, and then we back that by our team. And so real quickly, let me just show you what that looks like. So in this case, you're looking at my laptop, and this is a sensor. This is Lmntrix. So if you look at this, this is what it's learning. In your environment, we would name this something different. If your customer ABC, it would be named ABC ATR, but we don't name it Lmntrix typically. We give it a custom name. It's very difficult to disable this, very difficult to find it. And because it's a managed endpoint, we would know immediately if that endpoint doesn't communicate back to our cyber defense center. So we're always monitoring. If somebody disables it, we would know immediately. But it's very difficult to detect this and what it is. In this case, it's named Lmntrix, but in your environment, it would be custom named to something very different. So if you were to install a Symantec and you look at the services, it actually says Symantec. It actually says CrowdStrike. Ours wouldn't say that. So let me just jump back out here real quick and go back into the technology stack. So this has 5 use cases, allows us to validate breaches remotely, allows us to delete services, repair registries, block and quarantine, host isolate. It's extremely, extremely powerful. So majority of the time we're able to block and quarantine. If it's a server that cannot be, for example, when we do a POC, we just did a POC with a customer and they had a camera server with a lot of vulnerabilities. There was botnet detected on that. So we remotely removed the malware. We removed the service that the malware had created. We remotely fixed the registry and deleted all the files, all remotely, all done within minutes. So very efficient. And then, and obviously we create an incident for that and we tell the customer, hey, this is what happened. This is exactly what happened. And by the way, we know how it got in. Your NAT rule on your firewall is too loose. And we saw how they connected. And so we're recommending this particular change immediately. So this has additional other use cases. It doesn't use signatures to detect attacks. And this is very important. If you're using currently a signature-based endpoint like a Symantec or McAfee, so on an everyday basis, and this is a very large number, there are well over 500,000 pieces of malware that are created. What typical signature-based solutions do is they take the most prevalent versions of that malware, the most statistical prevalent versions, they create an MD5 signature for that malware, and then they update the endpoint signature. Same thing on the firewall. Palo updates or Checkpoint or Cisco updates the signature for something to block. And they're not able to update 500,000 MD5 signatures. So they just take the most prevalent versions. And that is how attacks get sort of past the perimeter and the traditional endpoints. So what we do at Lmntrix is there's a lot of threat hunting that happens. We don't use signatures. We've tested our endpoint. Again, it's effectively three endpoints in one. We've tested it against ransomware back to the 90s. It can detect command and control. It can detect open VPNs. It can detect peer-to-peer communication. It's extremely powerful. And again, I said, allows us to remotely fix and do anything, host isolate, quarantine, allows us to block attacks remotely. And this is very important. How do we do that? The way it works, it injects into the process at the CPU layer. And so let's say you are on your PC or your Mac and you launch Outlook. And Outlook, when you double click on the executable, it calls the CPU. The CPU calls the 6 or 7 libraries that need to sort of load in the memory for Outlook to run. What the endpoint does, it injects right into that process and starts following the threads within that process and says, okay, I see Outlook EXE being loaded, I see this DLL being loaded, and then suddenly it makes a left turn and calls PowerShell and Command Prompt and Chrome, and we block immediately at that point. It's basically pre-execution blocking, and it works very, very well. If you want to test this in a lab environment, we'll give you our endpoint. We will give you nation-state malware, and you're welcome to go at it and test it against any competing solution. But mind you, the most important piece of this is not just the technology. It's our team that is behind it, that understands how to use it, that understands what to look for, and that team encompasses intrusion analysts, incident response folks, software reverse engineering analysts. We run an entire research lab where we dissect malware both using static and dynamic analysis. We are continually adding our hunts back into our platform, and so you'll see those hunts in a little bit, and I'll explain that to you. It allows us to detect encrypted attacks that detonate on the endpoint. So a lot of communication inside of an environment, a lot of communication today is SSL encrypted. So if you're a Fortune 500, our recommendation would be to have the last mile, have some sort of a decryption appliance. If you read up on the Equifax data breach, they actually had a decryption appliance that was decrypting all data. What ended up happening was net of the Apache struts bug, which they should have patched, but net of that issue, they should have recognized the threat earlier because they let a security certificate expire on the decryption appliance, and their entire security team never noticed that they were not getting the same information, and that existed for 10 straight months. And so in large organizations, we do recommend, and SANS recommends, and most large research analysts do recommend that you decrypt some of the traffic so you have some visibility into it. But even if you don't decrypt that traffic, the threat actor still has to unencrypt something on the endpoint for the detonate, and we're able to sort of detect that and block that. And then most important to a lot of this is our automated hunting that we'll do, and I'll show you what that looks like and what that entails. So that's our endpoint. And mind you, all of these components, again, are integrated and they work together, but it is modular in fashion. We understand companies have technology debt. We understand companies have signed, multi-year agreements. So you can subscribe to 1, 2, and then as the time arises, and if you give us an opportunity to test it, you'll see how efficient it is and how well it works, especially when it's integrated with the rest of the platform and then combined with our team. Intelligence. Intelligence is one of the most important pieces of cybersecurity. What we have is we have effectively aggregated about 220 threat feeds. We have OEM arrangements with Palo Alto and Checkpoint. We bring in feeds from Shadow Server. We have our own network of sensors on every region in Amazon. And so this is basically an XML file that's integrated directly into the network level sensors that I talked about earlier, detect and hunt, and directly into the endpoint. And this is updated on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis, where we notice malware pops up on an IP address. It immediately gets updated on the network sensors as well as the endpoint. So threat intelligence is very, very important. And let me show you what threat intelligence looks like. So this is a threat intelligence feed. This is a subset of what we typically have, and this is all the threat feeds that are coming in into the endpoint, the network sensors, the hunt sensors. This is an Excel spreadsheet. The actual file is an XML, and it's operationalized and it's integrated in. So you can go out and talk to a company that provides you threat intelligence. But our threat intelligence, because we are a managed detection response company, it's orders of magnitude 7 or 8 times larger than you could buy individually. And it's very, very powerful, and it scans for malware domains, known websites that host malware, spammers, anything of that nature. So this is what a threat feed looks like. So let me back out of this and go back into the presentation. So threat intelligence, very, very important. The next 2 pieces are some of the sexy stuff that you may have seen recently with some companies out there that provide deception technology out there that are now selling it. So mind you, we are not a silver bullet solution. We try not to address one thing. We try to do a holistic, multi-vector solution that creates a tremendous amount of layers. Because as I'll show you later in the actual validated incidents, sometimes we detect an incident through one of our engines inside detect. Sometimes we detect an incident by hunting. Sometimes we detect an incident by a ransomware engine inside our endpoint sensor. So there are a lot of ways that threat actors get in, and so we have to create a lot of layers and inside an environment. And again, it's typically 1 or 2 network sensors sitting in span or tap mode, and 1 endpoint sensor, and this is a full stack agent. So this would typically replace your current existing AV or next gen AV or endpoint protection, but it can also work alongside it, and we're able to whitelist your existing solution. So deceive is exactly what it sounds like. It's deceptions. This is the old concept of a honeypot. There are 4 components to our deception technology. There's something called decoys, breadcrumbs, tags, and personas. So decoys are exactly what you probably remember back in the day, 15 years ago. This is a honeypot. Ours is basically, it's an Ubuntu server with a shell that looks like SQL Server, it looks like Exchange, it looks like a VNC, it looks like an FTP, and we have a lot of families that we support. It has 2 reasons why it exists. There's nothing vulnerable about it. You can't log into it. It'll say invalid login, invalid login. But there's 2 reasons why it exists. One is to detect naive attackers or internal people that are poking around the environment. The second reason it exists is to support something called breadcrumbs. And again, this is typically another VM that's sitting inside your environment, typically on an appliance. The decoy is. Breadcrumbs are not agents. Breadcrumbs are little lures that we embed in every endpoint. So the typical hack that occurs at an organization, a threat actor sends a phishing email to the entire organization. Somebody clicks on it, and that threat actor now has a foothold on a PC inside an environment. They actually don't know where they're at. Their first order of business is to install additional malware for persistence. Their second order of business is to dump all of the credentials on that machine. So if they got access to an IT machine, they would dump anything that's saved in your browser history, your browser cache. So anything in Chrome, anything in IE, anything in Safari. If you're using VNC or any tools, VNC, FTP, SSH, so anything you have saved, username and password, they use an exploit kit and they dump those credentials. Now they have access to those credentials and they start using those credentials. So let me give you a sample here. WC is an exploit kit that's used on a Windows machine. And so when you run it, it dumps the credentials of John Smith. So what we do with breadcrumbs is we give the threat actor on that endpoint another 30 credentials that they'll see if they actually run an exploit kit. And if they use one of our credentials, it connects right back to a decoy. They announce themselves. They tell us exactly where they're at. They tell us exactly what exploit kit they ran because we can fingerprint it. And then at that time, we start correlating how they got in. So this is, give you a good example. We ran this at a hospital organization. Within about 7 minutes of our technology stack coming online, we actually detected a human threat actor inside the environment. We immediately called the CIO and the CISO and said, hey, there is a human actor inside the environment. This is the exploit kit they ran. They are currently on this machine, and we just saw them hop to 2 other machines, and we know where they're at. And they said, hey, that is great. Thank you very much. So that is Mandiant on a long-term red team. And so we caught Mandiant. They didn't know we had caught them. But most important to this was that they were using Dell SecureWorks as their MSSP. And for the next 5 weeks, Dell never detected that there was an internal red team inside the environment. In fact, they never detected it. They had to be told of it. And so part of that has to do with the fact that MSSPs use a log-based approach. They're really not focused on these very advanced threats. And so we can detect human attackers typically with 0 false positives, especially if you're running an internal pen test. We will detect them. We'll tell you exactly what tools they ran, where they're at. And it's usually an aha moment for customers like far out. This is very good. And so when you combine this technology with the rest of our platform that I talked about earlier, it's very, very powerful. So a couple other samples. Those 2 network shares don't exist. And mind you, a bad analogy to deceptions is you break into my house and there's 10 Rolexes on a table, so you just grab all 10. That's a bad analogy. That's not the way it's done. A good analogy is you break into my house. There are 10 safes inside my house. You need to run an exploit kit or something to break into those safes. Mind you, only one of the Rolexes is real in those 10 safes. So there is a high likelihood you will trip one of our breadcrumbs. You will use it. In fact, we've caught every POC and every customer that's done ever a pen test, and our deception technology is in there. We've caught the pen tester. So let me go back to deceptions real quick. So decoys, again, are small little VMs typically sitting on an appliance or an OVA file. 2 use cases, detecting rogue or naive attackers. Breadcrumbs are little things that we inject into endpoints, and this is it doesn't take up any CPU resources or memory. It's sitting in registry, it's sitting in memory, and we refresh these once a month automatically. We can show you how it works. We inject it. You can dump the credentials. We remove it cleanly, and we can show you how that works. The third component is something called tags. So that JavaScript that you see currently, that runs on our website. If you were to clone our website and bring it up on another DNS infrastructure and try to phish our employees or spearfish them, as soon as you copy our website, this JavaScript makes a call to us and notifies us. So this concept of tags can be embedded in everything. So Word documents, PDF files, Excel spreadsheets, we can embed them in emails. So if you are the CIO or the CEO of the corporation, our team would send you an email. And it would say CEO's personal tax returns, something really juicy. And if a threat actor had ever broken in and then gotten that far, they're typically attracted to something juicy. As soon as they click on that email, they announce themselves to us, and that's part of our proprietary technology and how we do that. This concept can be taken even down into a SQL server where we would create a view inside SQL, disconnected from your application, your primary applications. If you're doing a lot of custom internal application programming, we create a custom view. We call it customer database, and account numbers and things of that nature. Inside that view sits a stored procedure. If a threat actor had gotten past our network sensors, had gotten past our endpoint, had gotten past our deception, and gets to the SQL server, they have to execute a select statement to exfiltrate that data. As soon as they execute a select statement on that view, they announce themselves to us. And so obviously we know what they're doing at that moment, where they're at. So every one of these components is geared towards a different sophisticated level of attacker, from naive and rogue employees to nation state to criminal organizations, which most of the dark web is criminal based, to nation state attackers like China, Russia, North Korea. And so very, very powerful. They all work together. Personas is the last component. So if you subscribe to the Deceive component, we create a couple of social media profiles that look and feel like they work for you. So and if somebody's spear phishing your organization, they're going to try to figure out the email format based on it, and we would see that immediately, and obviously notify you, hey, there's a spear phishing campaign happening right now. Please be very careful. Additionally, this can be embedded in internal applications where, if you've got a customer database, you create an account for us and it's got a forwarding email to us. If a rogue employee had stolen something and tries to, take your customers and of that nature, we would know. So all of these components work together. Personas are pretty straightforward, but decoys, breadcrumbs, and tags all work together to create a deception environment. We're sort of baiting and luring attackers. Mind you, it's not the most important piece. The most important piece is the entire combination, but really the most important piece is the fact that it's backed by our team. Our team knows how to operate it, and you just consume the outcomes of those results with very detailed recommendations. Reconnaissance is the last piece, and this is dark web reconnaissance. So we built crawlers about 5 years ago that are crawling the dark web, and we are looking for breach credentials. So it takes about 20 milliseconds to steal a credential, and most threat actors just post it for sale on the dark web. If we see it pop up, we will notify you, hey, these credentials just popped up for sale. It doesn't mean you've been breached, but a lot of employees use the same username and password when they're at home, when they're on social media sites, on any other sites, or they've got one change in their password. So these credentials, when they're stolen, they're put on the dark web. We see them immediately. We immediately notify you, hey, please change the password of this user. We just saw it posted for sale on the dark web. And I'm going to show you a very detailed example of what that dark web looks like in terms of just to show you our capabilities that we have. So this has been going on for about 5 years. We've got way more than 6 billion identities that we're aware of and documents, and well over a couple 100,000 data breaches today. This is a little bit old. So at the core, this is sort of the entire technology stack. Now let me show you what a validated incident looks like. It's very, very important that you see this. Let me see here. So this is I'm going to show you about 3 of these, and then I'm going to show you the dark web, and then I'm going to show, at that time, at the very end, I'm going to show you what threat hunting looks like. So please bear with us. I know we're getting to the top of the hour. I know we passed the hour. So if you're still on with us, please hang in there. So this is what a validated breach looks like. So this was at a customer site where we identified the source IPs, where it connected to internally on the network, the IP, the TCP port that was used, what stage of the kill chain. So very detailed, all correlated within minutes, as sort of an incident summary. And this is a very simple one. But most important to this is the recommendations that we're saying, create an access control policy to block these, or create a group to block these domains potentially. Let me show you a more complicated one. This is a dire Trojan. So the dire Trojan was a malware that was very prevalent in 2015 and 2016, and it's sort of popped its head up again recently. But basically, this is a piece of malware that, through spear phishing, gets installed on your browser, and what it does, it doesn't do anything initially, but it sort of looks at your browser history, and it looks at have you gone to any banks? Have you gone to Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, and US Bank? Those 5-6 banks have about 60% of the deposit. So if it notices you've gone there, it keeps track of that. Now, when you actually are sitting inside your corporate environment or outside, and if it's installed, and you actually go to Wells Fargo, it immediately detects it, it redirects it, and then you think you're at Wells Fargo. And it looks and feels the same. So you log in, you try to log in, it captures your credentials, and then immediately redirects you to the actual real Wells Fargo website. So this is an incident summary that we captured on the customer's environment. It's very detailed in scope, telling you exactly the attack summary that occurred, how it launched. It used command prompt to launch Explorer out of the user's app directory. It made multiple connections to stun servers, and C2 servers are called command and control servers. This is the entire, all of the indicators of compromise, all of the hashes, what it's connecting to. So all of this was correlated and done by our team. Immediately we tell you exactly what occurred, and the threat information, what changes occurred on the endpoint, where it's installed, the registry changes that were made, and mind you, we can fix all of these remotely and eliminate it. But most important to all of this is, obviously, this is very important for later on in record keeping and very difficult to do by internal SOC teams. But most important to a lot of this, obviously we have the timeline of what occurred, is the recommendations that we're making. And if we see this, we'll call you at 2 o'clock in the morning. We'll call you at 3 o'clock in the morning based on the escalation profiles you've defined internally with us. If we consider it a high priority incident, we'll tell you, hey, we were able to block and quarantine this, and we know how exactly got in. There needs to be a change rule made on the firewall immediately so this doesn't occur again. So the recommendations are very clear. If you don't understand them, we will explain them. Typically, junior level engineers and junior level sysadmins can follow our instructions. So we take all of the work from your SOC team and try to make them very, very efficient. If you're running a smaller organization and if you don't have internal intrusion analysts and security folks, we're really a great fit from that perspective. And there's multiple versions of this. There's a crypto client miner currency that we discovered inside an environment. So the new method is crypto client miner currency malware today basically steals CPU resources, but threat actors have figured out a way to attach malware. And so this. And by the way, all of these were from customer environments that we detected. We've anonymized this. And so every one of these was caught in a different mechanism. Sometimes the endpoint, sometimes our network sensors, our IPS, sometimes through threat intelligence, sometimes through our threat hunting. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a little bit. So this is the type of result that you get, very clear recommendations on exactly what to do next. So very, very powerful. So I'm going to jump to dark web real quick. And I'm going to show you so this was an engagement that we did with a hospital organization. They knew they had been breached. And I'm just showing you this to show you the extent of our capabilities in the dark web, where they knew they had been breached. They wanted to understand the extent of that data breach. And so we basically spent 16 hours of investigation work by 4 analysts in the deep and dark web. And the deep and dark web entails paste sites, black market sites, invitation-only sites. So very difficult to sort of infiltrate these. And effectively what we discovered, and I'm going to show you what we discovered. So this is an executive level summary that we presented to the board. The actual report was 2,000 pages long. And these are breach credentials. There were 1,400 breach credentials from this organization with usernames and passwords available for sale. This is hacktivism, and all hacktivism means is that threat actors are chatting among themselves on how to break into an organization. So if you're on our dark web service, we actually track those threat actors. We track what IPs they pop up out from and what usernames and handles they're using and where they're actively trying to be focused on you and trying to break into your environment. That's all hacktivism is. So this is evidence of hacktivism that we found, medical center plans that were exposed, and obviously this could be physical security issues here. And in terms of the type of documents that we found well over 1,000 documents, and a lot of this had to do with misconfigured SharePoint, misconfigured Dropbox, and a lot of misconfigurations that the IT team had done. The types of documents we found, well over 20 data leakages, where we found those documents, and the types of documents we found. So every one of these is a PII violation. Obviously, you can say, these are checks that were written that we discovered, personal information being exposed, bone scans, skeletal scans. So this is the type of capability we have in terms of sort of going into the deep and dark web. This is not a Google search. This is botnets. This is command and control stuff. This is paste sites, invitation-only forums, very difficult to infiltrate, where we were able to find this data. Legal exposure documents, applications for employment. And I'm just showing you this just to show you the extent of our capabilities. Contracts that they have with third parties, the check amounts, how much they were. So that is the capabilities of our dark web service. Now let me sort of show you something. We obviously operate a research lab, and this is on, you can see the URL there. So in terms of what's occurring in the market today, there's a lot of companies that are saying, we have an AI-enabled appliance, it's unicorn-enabled, and it does a lot of magical things. So let me tell you, security is really hard. There's no magic to it. It requires a lot of effort and a lot of grunt work. And so what we did here in this blog post is we ran a POC with a customer, and these are incidents that we caught, and you'll see on the right-hand side that were missed by existing solutions. And because we are hunting, because we are baiting, because we are doing a lot of things inside the environment to catch these, And you'll see this, and competitors have asked us to take this down. One competitor asked us to take it down because they're going for their next round of funding from a VC, and it made them look bad, and we said no. So this is the type of capabilities, and these are the types of things that were missed by existing solutions. So very, very important to sort of see that, and this is obviously on our portal. One thing I want to show you is the cybersecurity landscape is very complicated. So in terms of what's sort of available out there, this is the team that is behind our platform. These are threat detection, threat hunting analysts, engineers, very, very experienced. These are not SOC 1, these are not sysadmins, these are not network engineers. Very, very deep level forensic malware analysis, where we do static and dynamic analysis of malware in our lab, see how it's working, put that back into our platform. So as I talked about the kill chain, this is the last 5 stages of the kill chain, and as you can see, we create a lot of layers inside an environment to sort of detect malware, detect human adversaries, detect fileless attacks, malwareless attacks, where threat actors are not using malware, they're using built-in tools from Windows and Mac OS and Linux, such as PowerShell and things of that nature, to build tools on the fly, and we can detect those incidents. And here's sort of a cybersecurity landscape map that's put together by a company called Momentum Cybersecurity. They're a large VC, and there's well over 3,000 vendors in cybersecurity. And so it's very difficult for most companies to figure out what to buy, and typically in a lot of organizations there's a mishmash of products. None of them are integrated, none of them actually work together very well. And so as a managed detection and response, we are focused on core security, making sure your data is not stolen, making sure your data is not infiltrated out. We create a lot of layers inside the environment. We take the platform, we marry it with our high-end team, and we are the ones that are looking for that all the time on a 24/7 basis. As an organization, we are global in nature. We have operations in APAC, we have operations in Hong Kong, as well as Europe, and as well as the United States. And so this is the map. If you're a CIO or a CISO, very difficult to sort of comprehend. Now, in terms of AI, and I talked about that earlier. So Amazon today cannot figure out how to filter out thousands of product reviews. And if you think an AI vendor, by the way, there is no AI, it's just machine learning. If you think an organization has figured out machine learning and how to detect advanced attacks, where Amazon cannot figure out how to filter out thousands of fake product reviews. So don't be fooled by products and vendors that are pitching a lot of AI, because there is no AI. AI, the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning moves effectively once a decade. The last major breakthrough was done at the University of Toronto by the ImageNet competition that they had, where they made a major breakthrough. So AI is good for a few things today. Image recognition, natural language processing, very great. But if you're going to be bought and sold on a vendor that's pitching an AI magical unicorn appliance, where you know that Amazon can't filter out fake reviews. So be very cognizant of that, be very weary of that, because cybersecurity is really hard. It's not easy. There is no magic here. This is decades of experience built into this platform. And the last piece of the puzzle I want to show you, which is very, very technical, is our threat hunting. And before I finish up here, so this is what threat hunting looks like. These are Python scripts. This is something you will never get from any off-the-shelf solution that you buy. So this, and I've got 6 examples of this. So this here says drivers, anomaly, endpoint. So this finds malware running on Windows drivers across the environment. So this is a script. This runs every hour on the hour, and we've got hundreds of these that we're effectively, again, it's like a home inspection. We're walking into the endpoint. We're checking things. So we're not waiting on something to pop up. We are actively searching on things that would change, that a threat actor needs to change to break inside an environment. So this one runs on the endpoint. It's not process intensive at all. So this finds variable hashes and same versions across all endpoints, displays drivers with different names and locations. And so when we detect something, it comes up to one of our intrusion analysts. Our intrusion analyst immediately starts investigating and goes, oh, this is a false positive. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to bring it up to the client. And so we see a lot of false positives where we detect something, we investigate, nope, it's not a big deal, we move on. But when we do detect something and the analyst starts investigating and goes, wow, this is important, I've detected something, this is new, right? This is something new. And if it's new, typically your SIEM-based controls that I talked about earlier would have never detected it. Because again, there are two types of logs. There are allowed logs and block logs. And so if you are not being adaptive and looking for very strange anomalous behavior inside your environment, it's very difficult to sort of detect these attackers. Here is something called, this is a network hunt called rogue connections. So this script finds rare connections collected from hunt, displays established connections that are least occurring across all endpoints, displays listening ports that are least occurring. So this is looking for command and control servers that are least occurring. Typically when we work with a customer, we engage, we ask how your network infrastructure is laid out. We don't randomly just ship you an appliance and say, plug it in, it's going to do magical things. No. We actually ask you, how's the network infrastructure laid out? How's the data flowing? And then we configure our endpoints and configure our network sensors to put them in the right locations and in the right ways. So we're looking at the right data. And so these endpoint hunts, and this is a network hunt looking for network packets on that are least occurring inside the environment, because again, threat actors are trying to stay under the radar, and they might have created an SFTP port on a machine, and very difficult to detect that because it's very methodical, and so we look for these things. Again, another one. This looks for the last executables that ran on every endpoint and looks for registry changes that have occurred. So this script finds rare executables collected from hunt, outputs a CSV file for our analysts to immediately look at. So every endpoint, we basically go, hey, what are the last 2 or 3 things that ran, and what is sort of the least occurring across that environment, because we know how threat actors are going, or what is most occurring. The three machines that suddenly launch command prompt all with the same timestamp, because we know that's an automated process. If it's done by the internal team, if it's a false positive, we'll bring it up. You'll say, hey, we did that internally. That's a false positive. Great. We'll whitelist that and we move on, and we won't look for that IP coming from maybe that admin at that moment. So we have a lot of these hunts, well over 200 that are running both on the endpoint as well as the network. Very, very sophisticated. This is some of our core IP. And I just wanted to sort of show you that what an actual threat hunt looks like. And so we build these, we add these in. Other companies have asked us to license some of these out because this is very difficult to do, especially if cybersecurity is not your core business. Again, it's very holistic and very managed and all delivered by our team, and you just consume the outcomes. So typically, in most organizations, we offer a free trial of the solution, and it's typically at that moment it's the lights hit on because we discover anomalies, we discover misconfigurations in your current controls, we discover misconfigurations on your firewall, and it's effectively like a very deep and comprehensive pen test, much farther and deeper than a normal pen test, where we discover a lot of loose controls, and over time, day over day, as you follow our instructions, your attack surface decreases, and once you're sort of on the solution for 5 or 6 months, it becomes in a stasis mode where we're catching very little things as long as you're following our instructions, and you tighten your controls over and over and over again. Or we discover a new method that the Chinese have invented, and we put that on our platform, and we're looking for that at that moment. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, our solution. And I know we've gone way over time, and I do apologize, and I appreciate that anyone sort of stayed on at this moment. And so I'm going to sort of hand it back over to Mark at Openlogix and let Mark have the last input here. And Mark, you're welcome to add and add to mine. And if there's any questions, we did not get to, and if you've asked those, we will answer those after. Again, please take the 5 handouts. The Excel spreadsheet in the handout has detailed how our solution maps to the NIST framework, how it maps to the CI's top 20 controls, as well as a comparison of our endpoint to other endpoints. And again, that's just one of our technology stacks. Know that the most important part of all this is the team that we have behind it as well. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to hand it back to you for a little bit, and we'll hopefully finish up here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Hamlet. That was awesome. I think we covered a lot of ground here, and as I promised in messaging everyone here and telling you about tuning in today, you should not miss this session, and I hope you feel that way after tuning in. We wanted to provide significant insight on the failure of today's approaches to cybersecurity and lay out where you need to be in the next 1 to 3 years. That said, we've been recording everything. ultimately, I'll post a recorded copy of this on the Openlogix website, and I will send a follow-up email to everyone with a link so that you can potentially share that with any of your teammates that might have missed out. And then I'll reach out as well to see if there's any interest in having a more personalized conversation and diving into how we might be able to actually help your organization out moving forward. So with that, thanks Lmntrix for the presentation, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.